In a recent video, I said if you wanted to know more about 12 volt, 24 volt, understanding DC, that I would go through it in a future video, and so that's what we're going to do today. I'm going to be covering a lot today, and so I'm going to start reasonably small and work my way up. We're going to be talking about multimeters, chassis earths, simple sub 10 amp circuits, relayed circuits, DC to DCs, battery isolators, and even some theory on understanding how amps, watts, and volts all work together in regards to 12 and 24 volt. And so yeah, let's jump straight into some of the simple stuff. And so yeah, the first thing I want to do is go through how to use a multimeter. I know that seems really simple, but there's a couple of features with this thing that you might not know how to use. So make sure you're in DC, and we will test the voltage of this battery. And so right there, you can see that this battery is at 13.37 volts. And so I know that's super simple, but we're gonna jump into another feature on a multimeter that you might know a little less about. I reckon I probably use it on every single 12 volt or 24 volt job I do. So let's talk about that one. Let's go over to a different feature, which is the ohms feature. And so that is the one that looks like a little set of headphones. And so when you set it to that, you'll notice it says OL, and I thought that meant overloaded, but according to Tom, he's my Sparky mate who I fact checked all this with, he actually said it's open line or open loop. It's actually measuring for resistance, but just to simplify it, I'm gonna say that this feature is for knowing when you're touching the same bit of metal. It's gonna say open line or open loop until we touch them together, and it'll go to 000, meaning zero resistance. Now you're probably wondering, why is that helpful? Well, if you can imagine, let's say you turn on your headlights and your headlights are working, but you've got one tail light that's not working, and so somewhere along the line, you've got a broken circuit. Knowing that this tells you when you're touching the same bit of wire, you can probe one end and keep moving your way down the line until you stop getting your little screen that says 000. And that tells you that you've all of a sudden touched the wire at a point where it's broken. Another reason that might come in handy is, let's say you've got a wiring loom at one end and a wiring loom at the other end. Let's say a trailer loom. So you've got some fella, he's broken the trailer plug off 100 times, and so it's got heaps of different colors, heaps of different fixes, and you're not sure which is which anymore. You can touch one end of the wires and then you can probe the other ones until you get your zero resistance reading. And so yeah, that's just a couple of features, but we're going to use a couple more as we move through this. And so I know this is a bit rudimentary, but I've just made this up to represent a vehicle chassis, a vehicle body mount, and a vehicle body. And all through your car, you will find earth leads that earth out the chassis of your vehicle. Usually in the engine bay, there'll be an earth lead from your battery to your chassis, your battery to your body, your battery to your motor, or any combination of those. And that's to earth out every major metal structure in your car. And so we'll earth out our chassis rail to the negative post on the battery. If we grab our multimeter again, we can see that we have continuity across our negative post and all along our chassis. If we go to try and test continuity to our body, anything earthed to the body without a proper body earth will not work. And it's the same if you have a tub on a dual cab. They usually have these rubber mounts, and so if you go and install a dual battery system in your tub and go to earth to the tub, it might not actually work because you haven't added a body earth to that tub, or your body earth in your car might be bad. And so let's now earth out the floor of the car. And I've had problems in my GQ, like with lazy starting and stuff like that, and it's turned out that, you know, I've needed to add earths or whatever the case. If you upgrade your alternator, stuff like that, you might need to add better earths. And so now if we test continuity between the negative and our body, you can see we have continuity and zero resistance. And so if we had an accessory like this light that we wanted to install in the tub of our dual cab, for example, everywhere we earth out our accessory, whether it's the negative post of the battery, the chassis, or the body, it will work on any of them. And that's because we have the correct earthing in our vehicle. And so you can pretty much just think of your body and your chassis as more negative post of your battery. And so now that we've covered chassis and body earths, I might just remove this out of the way just to simplify it again, and we'll go back to just the battery. And so in the next part of our video, we're going to create a simple circuit under 10 amps, and I'll explain why that's important. And so the most simple circuit you could probably think of is going to be something under 10 amps with no switching, just positive and negative with a fuse. We're going to start at the positive side. We've got our fuse, which should always be placed as the closest thing to the positive terminal, so that if it does blow, it's only this section here that remains live. And so that's where we're going to start. So we're going from the positive terminal to the positive side of this volt gauge, which is going to be our accessory for this test. And then we're going to connect to the negative side of the volt gauge straight to the negative post. And so that's how the most simple kind of circuit works. In fact, I have this exact circuit in my car. I have my volt gauge hardwired to the battery so that I can see my battery voltage at all times, even when the car is off. And so realistically, you can have your switch in the positive side or the negative side. I like positively switching things just so it makes it easier when I am powering the LED light for the switch. We're going to add that to our circuit. And so for this, all we're going to do is run this switch in line, except we're going to add an extra earth, which is the earth for the illumination of the switch. Generally, simple switches will just have 3 tags like this, and more intricate switches might have tabs for dimming or for multiple ways, like a winch switch in and out and things like that. And so just like before, we can use the ohms feature in order to find out which 2 of these are going to close that circuit. I'm guessing that it's the 2 closest to one another. I'm going to put my multimeter there and there. As soon as this closes its circuit, it's the same thing as touching the same bit of metal. And so I've got those connected there. Hit the switch and it goes to 0, 0, 0. So we know that we're in the right spot. Let's put that aside and let's create this circuit. All we're going to do is we're going to unplug the positive. We're going to keep the fuse as the first thing into one of our tabs that we found was the circuit switcher. Then we're going to go out of the other switch terminal and into the positive side of our volt gauge. Then we're going to go out of the negative side of our volt gauge and onto the negative terminal. And so now when we flick our switch, our volt gauge comes on. Now to go that one step further to complete the circuit, we're going to take another earth and we're going to add it to the final terminal on the back of the switch. And that's going to give us our illumination when we turn the switch on. And so again, that is coming out of the positive into the switch, out of the switch into the gauge, out of the gauge back to the earth, and then one additional earth to illuminate that switch when we turn it on. It doesn't take long for 12 volt to get messy. You can see all I've got is a fuse, a switch, and one accessory, and it's already just an absolute spider web. And so it's one thing to understand the theory and the prac behind it, but to keep it neat is another thing entirely. And that's something that I've tried to do this year with my car, is just trying to get all that 12 volt neat, just so that if you do have issues, it's easy to trace and easy to figure out. That kind of circuit is good for anything under 10 amps. And in order to understand that before we get into relays, we're going to have to understand the next part, which is wire size. Now, the longer amps travel through a piece of wire, the more resistance there is. The more resistance there is, the more voltage drop there is. The more voltage drop there is, the more heat there is. And that's why you end up with melting wires and that. And that's precisely why we have wire that big to power a winch, because a winch can draw upwards of, 100, 200 amp. My winch could draw up to 500 amp per motor, whereas an air compressor might only draw 50 amp, and then that little volt gauge might draw 1 amp. And so we can use really small wires for that volt gauge, but we need really big wires for a winch. The longer distance that wire travels, the thicker it has to be. This might be okay to power a winch that is going from the battery to the bull bar, but if you have your winching batteries under your tray like me and your winch is right up the front of the car, that's traveling a good 5 meters, and so you need to go to really big wire, which is why you see, you know, the guys with twin motor winches, they've got that massive ridiculous wire. Let's expand on that while going into the next part, which is talking about relays. So relays are good for a few different reasons, and I'll explain what they are. So first of all, they're a really good way to use really small signals to turn on really big things. We couldn't exactly have wire this big going from our winch into our car and then running the entirety of the winch's power through a switch and then back out again. You think that's 200 amps potentially coming into your car, going through a switch and then going back out through your firewall over a lot of metal, and the impracticality of having wire this big inside the car is just, it's ridiculous and it's dangerous. And so that's where these little bad boys come in. And so we can have tiny little itty bitty signals like this powering stuff that takes wire this big. And that's pretty much mainly what a relay is responsible for. Another thing that a relay is really good for is turning on accessories if conditions are met. Throughout your car, there's lots of different signals. A couple off the top of my head are reverse signal, for example. You got a switch in your gearbox that actions a relay that turns on your reverse lights when you reverse. You can tap into that, have a relay, and have that relay power to a reverse camera, for example, because the signal's already there. High beam is another good one. So you obviously don't want to have your car's OEM wiring powering, you know, big 20 amp, 30 amp, 40 amp light bars. And so you nick that signal, power a relay, and then power a big light bar off your high beam signal. I'm sure we've all heard the term ignition relay. When your key touches the contacts in the barrel, that is just sending a little signal to a relay that powers all your ignition items. And so, yeah, there's lots of little signals throughout your car that you can pinch from, power a relay, and power something bigger. There's lots of different types of relays. There's voltage sensitive relays that have their own conditions so that they'll only cut on when your voltage reaches a certain threshold. There's 2- and 3-way relays for like a winch, for example. All you're doing is using a small switch signal in order to power a big winch in 2 different directions. Relays are super cool. I'm a bit of a relay nerd, and you should be a relay nerd too, because they are bloody awesome. I might have to make some Team Relays shirts or something, because yeah, I'm all for relays. Let's keep moving. The way I like to think about a relay circuit is like a figure of 8. You've got a small loop and then a big loop, and the small loop is your circuit for turning on the big loop, which is your powered circuit. And so we might create a relay circuit to turn on this light. It says it is good for 14 volts DC and 40 amp. So this is going to be our switch circuit with all our conditions in it for turning it on, and then this is going to be our load circuit that we supply to our accessory that we're trying to power. So we're going to start with our switching circuit that's going to go through these ones here, but we're going to go in the negative side, we're going to go to the relay, and then we're going to come out of the relay into our switch and out of our switch, and then back to the positive terminal on the battery. And so the wire's just gone out of the negative into the relay, out of the relay into the switch, out of the switch and to positive. And so that's our switching circuit done. And so now for the power circuit, and this would be for the accessory itself. So we're going to come out of the negative, remembering that it doesn't have to necessarily be the negative post of the battery. It could just be good, clean metal surface in your engine bay, and into the relay, and then out of the relay to wherever you want to mount your light, back out of the light and to the positive terminal. Remembering that this is also where you would have the fuse in the light circuit. I don't usually fuse my switch circuits, just the light circuits. Now we have this switch circuit, which is powering the relay in order to power this circuit. And so let's hit our switch. And so yeah, that is the switch circuit going through the relay to power our light circuit. So in the next part, this is actually another type of relay. It is a voltage sensitive relay, also known as an isolator. This is what we call a voltage sensitive relay, or in Red Arc's case, they call it a smart isolator. This is still pretty much a kind of relay. And so this is for vehicles that do not have a smart alternator. So older vehicles like mine, for example, it is to connect your camp battery with your front battery while the car's running, but so it disconnects them while the car's off, so that your fridge only drains from your rear battery while the car's off. And so all it is it has two posts like that. You've got a lead that comes from your start battery, and then you've got a lead that goes to your rear battery. And all this isolator does is bridge the gap between these two while the car's on, and then disconnects while the car's off. It'll usually bridge that gap once it senses that you're above 13.6 volts, meaning that your alternator's running, and then it'll disconnect those again once it dips below about 12.7, so when your car's off and your alternator's not running. And so while these are very affordable and they work just fine if you don't have a smart alternator, I do think a DC to DC is better. If you think of the current and charge being like water, this is kind of like a gravity fed system, whereas a DC to DC is more like having a water pump. So this just evens out all your batteries while the car's running quite passively, but this pumps the charge to where it needs it most. And so yeah, the isolators are good, but I would pick a DC to DC every day of the week. I've had a DC to DC for years and they are so much better. You get so much more charge to your rear battery. It doesn't go flat anywhere near as much. Another couple of advantages to having a DC to DC is a lot of them, especially these days, have a lithium charging profile. You can actually use it for a rear lithium battery, whereas this I couldn't. Another thing is it has solar input. You can have solar panels, run it straight through this, and this will prioritize whether to use solar or whether to use alternator to charge your rear battery. If you had an isolator, you would need an MPPT solar controller in order to still use solar panels and charge your rear batteries. It doesn't matter whether you've got Red Arc, Enerdrive, Victron, Kickass, Kings, whatever you want to use. If it's a DC to DC, it's got enough amps for your setup, and it's got solar and lithium, then that's what I'd be choosing, whatever you can afford. And so this is going to get a bit technical, but for the finale of this video, I want to go into understanding 12 and 24 volt. In that video I did a couple of fortnights ago, I mentioned that it is super efficient to run your touring setup at 24 volt because all the wires can be half the size, and you can get away with wiring a lot of stuff without using relays because all the amps are a lot lower, and wire size only really cares about amps. And so remember that as we move forward. Now, I'm going to give you a formula. I'm going to simplify it a lot. Sparkies would probably understand that there's a bit more to this formula. For this video and for this purpose, we'll just stick with it being simple, and that is volts times amps equals watts. That probably sounds like gibberish. So what does it mean? It means that if we have an accessory that draws 100 amp and we're running it at 12 volt, it means that accessory is a 1200 watt accessory. So let's say it's an air compressor, right? It's a 12 volt air compressor and it's drawing 100 amp. That's a 1200 watt compressor. It wants to run at the wattage that it wants to run at. And so if the voltage drops, the amps are going to spike. If the voltage is high, the amps are going to be low. They kind of fluctuate in order to draw the watts that it wants to draw. So if I brought that same size compressor, the 1200 watt compressor, except it was at 24 volt, it's going to be drawing 50 amps because 24 times 50 is 1200. And so, yeah, the voltage doubles, but the amps halve. And as I said before, that I said to remember, wire only really cares about amp size. We can afford to run wires that are half the size. And so all the amps that I'm drawing for all the products back there in my 24 volt dual battery system are all running at half the amps. And so if you have heavy duty switches, there's no reason why you can't run some of those accessories without even running a relay, provided that your wire, your switch, and your fuse is all rated for what it wants to draw. Hopefully you're still following. I'm going to go into one more thing, which is the winch side of things. And so if accessories just want to run at the watts that they want to run at, how come when we power a winch like mine with 24 volts, how come it doesn't just run at the same amount of watts and half the amps? You're probably wondering. And that is because we're not using 24 volt motors in our winches to do that. We're actually running 12 volt motors overvolted to 24. And so that motor is thinking, oh, I'm just being plugged into 12 volt, except we plug it into 24 volt. And so the amps don't halve, they stay the same. And so what happens if the amps stay the same, except we double the voltage? We end up doubling the wattage. And so that's why it ends up running twice as quick, pulling twice as hard. And I was kind of walking around wondering, you know, if amps halve when you run things at 24 volt, why do all these winch truck guys have such massive wiring? Shouldn't you be able to half the wire size? But yeah, then I learned off Dan actually that it's actually them running a 12 volt motor at 24 volt and doubling the wattage, not halving the amps. So yeah, I thought that was super cool. And I hope that I've shared it in a way that makes it accessible and understandable to you, because I love learning it, I love teaching it. But yeah, I always hesitate making videos like this that is just me talking, whether it's sitting in front of my car or sitting in my shed having a chat with you guys. It's really close to Christmas. I've got a lot of big jobs coming on the GEU, and so I just wanted to have a break. And this was a way that I could do a bit of content for you guys without having to get stuck into the GU yet. I hope you all have an awesome Christmas and New Year break. Please stay safe, be sensible, enjoy your 4Bs, enjoy camping, enjoy your family, and I'll see you guys in the new year. If you enjoyed this video, please like it. If you want to see more, please subscribe, and I'll see you all in the new year. Thanks, guys.